Back on another episode of a Closer Look across the Village Media Network and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We certainly hope ours is one of them. With Michael Friscolanti, I'm Scott Sexsmith. It's Thursday, June 26, 2025. Great episode yesterday talking about the historic selling of the Bill Barocco stick. I have to confess, though, since the episode, I've been walking around singing 50 Mission Cap all over the place. And trust me, I have no business singing anywhere other than the shower. And even that's questionable.
That's 100% true. But I agree with you. I've actually played it on my Spotify last night. It's just a great song. It's a great song.
Funny, how that works.
It's a great song, great conversation. I love those kind of conversations that are sort of off the main news and just talking about something really interesting. Bill Barocco, the pride of Timmins.
Timmins, Ontario.
Yes. There's a billboard there.
Yep.
They have Bill Barocco. They celebrate Bill Barocco Day.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called, Bill Barocco Day.
It's a mouthful.
It made 74 years ago he died, and it's still in the news.
One gentleman who is still playing hockey at a very high level and very well, based on a couple of weeks ago winning not quite 2 weeks, winning the Stanley Cup for the second time in a row, will be here tomorrow night from the Florida Panthers, number 12, Jonah Gadjevich.
We can confirm that. We're allowed to tell people who's actually coming on. That's great. If I'm right, he's one of the players in that viral video of Paul Maurice screaming on the bench that you guys are going to go on the ice for the end. Am I right?
Yeah.
That's
that was
a wild
the best
moment.
part.
That's like from the movies, right? You know, you guys are getting you're going to be on the ice. And they were the fourth line guys. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great story. It's a great story. Paul Maurice, by the way, we're still trying to get on the show from last year. Still has not come on, even though he's from Sault Ste. Marie. We're in Sault Ste. Marie. But we'll leave that. We'll talk more about that tomorrow.
We'll get Jonah to hook us up.
That's great. Stanley Cup champ, our second one. We had another one on the show.
Michael Amadio, a couple of years ago.
Another Sioux boy. Yeah, a couple of years ago. I think it should be tradition. We should have a Stanley Cup champ on every year.
Let's do it.
They'll want to put that on their calendar, I'm sure.
The question is, though, will they be a Toronto Maple Leaf?
Isn't that always the question? It's always the question, yeah.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
You know who won't be is Mitch Marner, but that's a story for another day.
Has he picked where he's going yet?
He has not, but everything that I've heard and read come July 1, he's gone.
But no, you don't know. What's the rumor of which team's going to? No?
Nope.
Okay.
Just won't be Toronto.
All right. Well, tonight we're also going to switch gears and talk about a much more serious topic.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the opioid crisis in Ontario and fentanyl trafficking in Ontario. I'm sure a lot of people saw the headlines earlier this month. The OPP revealed the largest seizure ever of fentanyl, 38 kilograms, I believe it was.
Yeah.
A massive amount of lethal drugs taken off the street.
380,000 lethal doses, right?
It's crazy. Yeah. And it's wild how they keep breaking records. And you kind of hear these kind of headlines regularly, like, local police force says their largest fentanyl bust ever. So we're going to get a little bit of an inside view of this investigation, how it went down, what it means for cracking down on criminal organizations in Ontario. We're going to be joined by Thomas Carrique, who's the OPP Commissioner, as well as the gentleman who leads that team, Andy Bradford. He's the Acting Detective Superintendent of the OPP's Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. So they're going to take a few minutes to explain how this went down. I think it's going to be a great window into how these kind of investigations work.
We very much appreciate our two guests taking the time out of their busy schedules to speak to us tonight. Thomas Carrique, the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, and Andy Bradford, the Acting Detective Superintendent of the OPP's Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. Gentlemen, thank you to you both for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to join you.
Yes, thank you.
Let's start with a major announcement that made plenty of headlines earlier this month. The large fentanyl seizure, largest actually fentanyl seizure in OPP history, 38 kilograms, which equates to approximately 380,000 street doses of the lethal drug. It's a staggering amount. What can you tell us about Project Golden, the 11-month investigation that led to this massive bust?
Well, thanks very much for the question. I'll start and then pass it off to Detective Superintendent Bradford. This was a long-term investigation for us that spanned a large part of the province, and it really shows the value of the provincial police service being able to work in collaboration with its partners across the province with very focused intentions on ensuring that we are protecting communities from the most harmful substances. And you're right, it's astonishing to think that there was enough fentanyl to take 380,000 lives. And Andy, please jump in and talk a little more detail about the great work that you and your team did.
Yeah, just to add what the commissioner has said, this investigation was launched in July of 2024. It was 11 months. It initially started focused in southwestern Ontario on street level drug trafficking. By November, the investigators had identified a sophisticated drug trafficking network. It was multi-jurisdictional in nature, and it was evident the group was capable of obtaining and trafficking large quantities of fentanyl. It was at that time that we partnered with the Hamilton Police Service and the RCMP. At the end of May, we executed 16 search warrants across southwestern Ontario, Hamilton, and the Greater Toronto area. And as was stated, approximately $5.4 million street value in drugs were seized, highlighted by the 38 kilograms of fentanyl, which is the largest seizure of fentanyl in OPP history. And the real significance is, as stated, is that that equates to 380,000 street-level doses of fentanyl, with each one being potentially fatal.
Mm-hmm. Detective Superintendent, you're obviously a veteran of this. This is it's not something you're new to. But do you actually take a step back or have a moment when you see that amount of fentanyl on the table and think, wow, or is it for you just old hat now?
No, I wouldn't call it old hat, but I think what these investigations demonstrate, that what you're seeing across the province is this is a province-wide public safety issue. From 2016 to 2024, there's been over 51,000 opioid-related deaths in Canada. So this is a significant public safety issue, and it's very alarming.
Is there a certain element of the organized crime world that's doing this, or are there all kinds of different criminal organizations that are getting into trafficking fentanyl?
It's definitely a piece of organized crime, but there are varying groups. Organized crime are sophisticated. They identify vulnerabilities and they exploit them for criminal profits. So where there's areas for these profits to be made, they will engage in these types of drug trafficking behavior.
Commissioner, can you speak to this? I know there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of months about the Trump administration saying that a lot of fentanyl from Canada is going over the border to the United States. Did you see any of that in this investigation? And in general, do you see that in any of your investigations?
Great question. Thank you. And great opportunity to correct the misinformation. In this investigation, we did not see any of the fentanyl making its way across the Canada-U.S. border. There's very little evidence of that being a trend or pattern. Minimal amount of fentanyl has been seized going from Canada to the U.S., which does not eliminate the concern that both countries should have over fentanyl. Fentanyl is currently being produced domestically in Canada. The majority of the fentanyl produced in Canada is being trafficked in Canada. We are seeing some of it go to other countries around the world, but U.S. is not one of them. And the primary driver for that is fentanyl manufactured in Mexico is 4 times cheaper than fentanyl manufactured in Canada. Mm-hmm. As Detective Superintendent Bradford has indicated, the fentanyl market is all about profit.
Yep.
Everything that organized crime does is about profit. They are a poly-market industry, and they will go where the profit is. Yep. So it makes absolutely no sense that Canadian fentanyl would be a preferred source in the U.S.
I appreciate that answer. And also, I guess the average Joe doesn't really understand. When you say it's produced and manufactured in Canada, how is this happening? Like, are your investigators seeing this in major warehouses and small houses? How is this being produced? I'm sure there's a wide array, but how mostly is it being produced here?
There is a wide array of production methods. It is not difficult to produce. It can be made in very small batches in a bathroom in a house, in a kitchen in a house, up to super labs like we've seen in BC. We have not identified any major production facilities in recent investigations here in Ontario, but a number of the investigations that we've recently reported out on and others that we are currently involved in, that's something that we're always seeking to identify where is the fentanyl being produced. And that is something that we have to remain very focused on.
Gentlemen, I think a lot of people in the province and in Ontario communities read about a huge drug bust like this, and they think, wait a minute, this doesn't impact me. I don't traffic fentanyl and I don't use fentanyl. But that's not the case, is it? Can you speak to the public safety threat that these criminal organizations pose?
We certainly can. We have seen cases where there's been home invasions over drug wars or debts, and these criminal organizations just happen to bust through the wrong front door and harm and or fatally injure innocent people that have nothing to do with these drug wars and the illicit drug market. It is straining our healthcare system. It is impacting the quality of life in almost every community across this country. We are seeing unprecedented rates of property crimes in some areas. We're seeing, rates of homelessness that have some connection in some cases back to substance abuse. The availability of these drugs in our communities is affecting every walk of life, every standard of living. There's probably not somebody that you can't speak to that doesn't have a family or friend who knows somebody that has been impacted by a drug overdose. So we are all being affected by this. The quality of life in our country is in jeopardy based on the dramatic and devastating impacts of these drugs.
It's a very important your answer there, Commissioner, because you talk to some people. We've done some polling as well, and you ask people what's one of the main answers to helping to solve this wide crisis as you've described. And there are a lot of people who think, well, we need more police action, but can't be the only answer. Like, yes, we need investigations like this. What else is the OPP doing, working with other agencies in Ontario, for example, to help with this crisis that you described so well?
You're absolutely right. It's not something that the police can solve on their own. We, on behalf of a number of police services across this country who partner through CyROC, we developed the opiate strategy that is relied upon nationally, and that strategy entails education. It entails partnering with healthcare providers where we can. It entails enforcement and public awareness. And we continue to be dedicated to those very important partnerships. But we also have to remember that law enforcement is an important piece of this. And we should not take lightly the failed attempts at decriminalizing drugs in British Columbia. That had a dramatic impact on lives. People died as a result of that. The healthcare system was not prepared for the decriminalization of drugs in BC, and it was a stark reminder to law enforcement in BC, and it should be to all Canadians, that law enforcement plays an important part in the drug issues that our communities and country are facing.
We touched on the border earlier. I'd like to go back to that for a sec if we can. The OPP is playing a much more significant role in border security. Can you speak to that, Commissioner? How has the OPP's role expanded on that front, and maybe what triggered it?
Yes, well, we have been working in partnership with Canadian Border Services Agency and the RCMP, who, as you know, have primary responsibility for the security of the border, the CBSA at controlled border points and the RCMP for the borders between the controlled border points. But this is an area where there absolutely needs to be interoperability and there needs to be constant collaboration. Since December the 6th, we've done almost 28,000 hours of directed patrol. There's 2,800 plus kilometers of U.S.-Canada border in Ontario. So our officers are policing the communities that are border communities. So it's incumbent upon us to have a certain level of awareness and be focused on border security to support the RCMP. We've also been participating in joint aerial patrols, focused blitzes, and of course, Detective Superintendent Bradford runs a number of joint forces investigative teams from the Border Enforcement Security Task Force called BEST to the Provincial Drug Investigative Task Force that was recently stood up. A lot of the increased focus did come out of the attention being put on border security from the U.S., and it was long overdue and something that as governments work towards a new fair trade deal, once that is accomplished, and I hope that it is, that we do not lose our desire for more secure borders, that we do not lose our interest in ensuring that we are mitigating the effects of fentanyl and that law enforcement continues to be a priority. U.S. and Canadian citizens deserve nothing less from their law enforcement agencies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Detective Superintendent, this is like the Commissioner said, this falls under your purview as well. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, just that those in Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau, we have those two units, those two partnerships, the best team, and really the value is the partnerships both domestically and internationally, which allow us to form a multi-agency cross-border enforcement team. And then the Joint Forces Border Drug Interdiction Task Force. Again, we have international partners, domestic partners, municipal police services. That really allows us to take proactive investigations on the Ontario side of the border, focus on organized crime and those offenses that have a close nexus to that international border.
I appreciate that. Gentlemen, I know you only have a couple more minutes. You're both very busy. But I do want to ask about bail in this country. Commissioner, I know you're also, I believe, the president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. This is an issue that has been debated over and over at all levels of government. It's something that people in our communities are talking about. This idea that the bail system isn't tough enough, that people who are accused of very serious crimes are being let out on bail. We saw this tragically with the case of a young OPP officer a few years ago who was killed by somebody who was out on bail for some very serious charges. What are your thoughts in terms of whether the federal government's done enough to toughen the bail system? What else should be done?
We certainly appreciated the changes that came as a result of Bill C-48, which were strongly driven by the murder of Provincial Constable Greg Pershella, which you have referenced. Thank you for remembering, Greg. But there is more that absolutely needs to be done. We have been working with the federal government through the CACP to make some very practical and meaningful recommendations as to additional modifications to the bail system that we believe are required. We are still seeing too many repeat offenders being released on conditions for which they have no intentions on following, continuing to commit crime and violent crimes, and they are putting our officers at risk. They're putting our communities at risk. Enough is enough. We need to get serious, and we need to ensure that those that pose safety concerns to our communities are detained in custody.
We've heard Premier Doug Ford talk very openly about how we need, quote unquote, tougher judges, tougher justices of the peace. Do you agree with that?
We certainly need to ensure that there are consequences to actions. If there are no consequences for crime or violent crime, it means there's no deterrence. And a society that does not deter crime is a society that is susceptible to violence and victimization. And I don't think any of us want to raise our kids or live in a country that is susceptible to violence and victimization. We all have a responsibility to make sure that we have appropriate laws. Those laws are enforced. We cannot have a free and democratic society without law and order. And the time is now to ensure that bail is administered appropriately, that we have current, up-to-date laws that police can rely upon, and that people are held accountable for their actions before the courts.
Gentlemen, I know you're both tight on time before we let you go this evening. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like our audience to be aware of?
I think just from me, if you don't mind, gentlemen, I would like to publicly congratulate and thank again Detective Superintendent Andy Bradford and his team. They are doing absolutely tremendous work across this province. I couldn't be prouder of them, and I'm very grateful to them for everything that they do for this province every day.
Andy, last word to you.
Well, thanks to the Commissioner for the kind words, and certainly thank you to you both for having us today.
All right, there's Thomas Carrique, the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, and Andy Bradford, the Acting Detective Superintendent of the OPP's Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. Gentlemen, thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are definitely the kind of conversations we're going to be having here on Closer Look every day across the Village Media Network. People saw those headlines about this massive drug bust, the largest fentanyl bust in OPP history. We get a little more of a detailed window into how that works, talking to the people who are at the center of it. And you can imagine what always fascinates me is what's going on behind the scenes during those 11 months, right? So those two gentlemen on the call will be getting briefed and get regularly knowing what's happening in this ongoing multi-jurisdictional investigation. So super fascinating. And I did appreciate too hearing the commissioner's comments on the issue over bail reform in this country.
Yeah,
there's a lot of differing opinions on the bail system here. There is that idea that there are people who don't think it's strong enough, that there are too many people facing serious violent crimes that are let out on bail.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about that tragic case in 2022 of that young constable who was gunned down by someone who was out on bail on very serious violent crimes. And I believe one of the crimes he was accused of at the time was assaulting a police officer, and he was out on bail. So it was interesting to hear his comments on that. We know that it's on Doug Ford's radar. The premier in his own self-proclaimed rant.
Remember the middle of that press conference?
Yeah, last month talked about how we need tougher judges, tougher justice of the peace. So it's definitely an issue on people, and it was an issue in the federal election campaign as well.
Yeah. All right, tomorrow night, hockey. Going to talk some puck with Jonah Gadjevich from the Florida Panthers, fresh off his second straight Stanley Cup victory. It's going to be great. Be sure to follow us wherever you can on X, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and of course, across the Village Media Network or wherever you get your favorite podcast. For Derek Turner, executive producer, Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7.